Hey Facebook.
Hey friends, hey guys watching. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to share this Facebook Live. I can share it from here, can't I?
Yeah, like I tag myself, so. Feels like a nice pause to actually down-regulate myself a little bit right now. I can feel myself like sinking down. You might have noticed that now we're in our lounge room and not Sri Lanka.
Yep. Okay, we're ready.
So we're in our second day starting to look at values. So in our last overview of values, we talked about values as guiding principles in our life. So about values are the things that we steer our life via. That's how we make decisions. How do I know what I'm going to do with myself is based on my values, right? So the topic today is about, well, how do we know our values? So we could say that instead, how do we steer our lives? How do we know what we're going to do with ourselves? How are we going to direct our energy and our creativity and our attention and our love? You know? So this is a incredibly important question, right? If we want to live a life of value, live a life of significance that is meaningful and fulfilling, we really need to pay attention to this question. And when we start to actually ask ourselves, well, what do I want for my life? How do I want to steer myself? It has us start to examine ourselves very closely, and it starts to inspire other questions, right? I just asked one of them, right? Which is, what do I want for my life? How do I want to steer my life? What do I want for my life? Who am I? What's important to me? You know, these are really super important questions for us to be asking ourselves. So really the most fundamental piece of knowing what your values are is asking yourself these questions. You need to ask yourself these questions, and you need to ask them with a lot of earnestness, with a lot of honesty, to look at yourself, you know, and look at the larger picture of what you believe about life and what do you believe about reality. You know, do you have spiritual beliefs? You know, where do you believe the world is going, and what does that mean for who you want to be as part of this world? You know, these are all really tough kind of questions to consider, and they're really important questions, and it's the basis of us then actually being able to create a life full of beauty and wonder and all the good things in life. As we start to ask ourselves these questions, though, we're confronted with all of our socialization, right? So as we grew up with lots of expectation. You know, we had all this kind of expectation from our families about how we would participate in our families and what was like the right thing to do for our lives. We have all of these kind of, well, you should become a doctor and you should make lots of money and whatever it is. So we have all of these kind of social things that we've been steeped in over and over. And we also experience a lot of, in psychology, what are known as introjects. So when people have judgments of us and they see us in a particular way, they make projections about who we are. When we're little, we take those in and we take them in as truth. We introject them and we start to actually become the way that a lot of people see us. So when we start to ask these really fundamental questions, we start to get confronted by all of this socialization that we've grown up with. You know, and there's a real kind of pretty lengthy, I think, for most of us, all of us, I think really, process of filtering through all of the introjects and all the expectations. You know, I kind of take this thing that I believe about myself and I go, well, hang on, where did this come from? Was this something that somebody said to me at one point? Did they say, oh, you don't seem to have a very nice voice when you sing? Well, that's not a very nice thing to say, but it might be just offhanded, like, oh, you're a little bit out of key or whatever it is, and I take that in and I take it personally, and all of a sudden I'm not going to be, I shouldn't sing or whatever it is, So that kind of process it can be a challenging, confronting kind of process. And it's also an incredibly liberating process, right? Because I start to free myself, and I start to free myself to be able to create myself. A lot of the process of inquiring into our values and asking what we really want is also a process of asking, who do I want to be? Who do I want to live myself into? How do I want to create this personality, this identity? And that includes the roles that I want to play. Includes how I want to spend my time and how I want to participate in relating to people. And I think I'll pause there and see how this is impacting you.
Well, firstly, I just want to say I'm quiet tonight because I've got the flu. So I'm going to not be as chatty as I might normally be. I think just picking up from the last Facebook Live that we took where we were talking about values, and we did our overview of values. I think the cost of not having this inquiry is bigger than we realise, and it's more up close than we realise. So values might seem like a conversation that is a conversation that you could have or not have, or this sort of abstract concept of something that doesn't really feel necessarily that integral to your life and your relationships. Or
I got bills to pay and kids to feed. Like, I don't have time to think about, like, how am I going to steal my life?
But actually the research indicates that values are correlated with our self-esteem. And so whether we're living from our values, whether we're living in alignment with our values, and whether these values are introjected beliefs, so beliefs that our parents or our culture or this education system we were part of held, that we internalized and made our own, or didn't make our own, actually, just internalized and lived as if that's the truth, that's correlated, whether we've done that work and really questioned, is this truly what my reality is around how I want to be as a woman, who I want to be as a mother, how I want to behave as a husband, what my role is in the family, what my work is, whether I combine my sense of purpose and my passion with my work or not, how much money I should make, where I should live, how we parent our kids, the just type of relationship I have, all of these things that, like, if we haven't asked ourselves those questions, we're likely living from introjection. And that if we think that values is kind of this abstract conversation to have, I think we're missing that actually it's intrinsically related to your self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. And that, and tomorrow we'll talk more about this, but the way that, our biological system of emotion is about our intrinsic motivation, right? It indicates where we feel motivated, our emotions, and that is about our values. What motivates us is about our values. And so ensuring that you're spending your energy that you have, the resources that you have, in areas that are actually important to you. It's not an abstract conversation that we could possibly have maybe one day, someday, or that we'll go and to attend a Tony Robbins to identify what our values are. It's actually like super core. And in terms of couples, when I say couples for work, having conversations about values. Like, often couples are arguing about values. They're arguing about a difference in values, which we're also going to address in the next couple of days. What do we do when we have difference in values? It's an important conversation. I think it's much closer in who we are than what we realize. In fact, it is the identification of who we are.
Yeah, super well said. Love that you say all that. Yeah, and another thing that we said in the first session around values is that there are some fundamental things to value, right? It's like being in reality about kind of what, has us feel happy and enriched and so on, and kind of paying attention to that, knowing what has us healthy. There's a certain objective level of values in that we steer ourselves through reality towards what is valuable to us, right? And in a way, what I'm hearing you speak about, Prem, is that there is a lot of value in doing the inquiry around our values. We should have value to look at what is valuable to us.
Yes.
That's like a foundational value that is going to help us if we want to steer our lives and create the things that are really important to us. Then it's going to be a really valuable thing to do to kind of go through in that process of inquiry.
Yeah, when we don't do that, we live in states of guilt, we live in states of anxiety, we can drop into depression, we get sick. Like, living out of alignment with our values is costly, actually.
Yep, totally.
Have relationships that are not the right relationships for us, be in jobs that we don't want to be in, but we're in them. All these kinds of things are an expression of not being clear on what our values are. Yeah.
And how we actually take ourselves on that journey of the inquiry is like something I want to get more into in the next few days, in that when we start to look at ourselves really honestly and go, well, what I really value and where am I not actually living according to what I most value, it creates a lot of dissonance, right? So it can be quite often pretty uncomfortable doing that inquiry, right?
Dissonance, dissonance meaning there's like a mismatch. There's a sense of something feels off, you know, it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it can have us go into shame. Like, oh my God, I'm not actually living the person I want to be. And there's places I'm not proud of myself because there's behaviors that aren't actually in alignment with my values. That's kind of confronting stuff to look at and admit to ourselves. And then this is where I think the journey of going through this inquiry, it's really important to be kind of gentle with ourselves, and love our imperfections, like we can't just go, well, I really value this thing and immediately I'm embodying those values. There's a whole process to go through of, well, firstly, even just being honest, and then, well, what behavior needs to change, and then I might even have to learn new skills, or there's adaptive behaviors that have probably protected me, so how do I be loving to myself, for where those behaviors are actually serving? They do have a value in a way, right? So, and now I've got kind of values conflicts where I, this way in which I kind of alleviate some of my pain or whatever it is valuable to me, but it's also sabotaging me at times. So
we'll look at that, and we'll look at inner conflict around values too.
Yeah.
I just want to say that, as in we have in all the other Facebook lives, other than the overview days, which is the start of each chapter of the new section, we will put a practice in the comments so that you can get practical about what we're talking about today. So we will put an inquiry practice. It'll be a YouTube link that we'll upload tonight.
Yep. So the other thing I wanted to say about this kind of socialization that we all go through is that it's actually supernatural. It's actually really important. We've got to start somewhere, in a sense, and to start with when we're babies, we're all just kind of taking everything in, and of course we're gonna, as we get older, take in everything that we're told, and that's a really important part of our growth, and we can look at kind of developmental psychology and how people kind of shift through these stages of growth, and actually a lot of people stay very socialized in their values, and that's okay, I think that it means there's a way in which we don't get the kind of full potential of who we can be if we don't kind of, to some degree, move on, or we really look at those things that we're being socialized with and we consciously go, actually, I do really believe this.
Really choose it.
I choose it. I fully actually inhabit the things that I've been socialized with, and developmentally, I'm still actually authoring who I am, right? And this is kind of the next phase of the development people go through is they go through that socialized stage and then into this self-authoring where I consciously choose who I'm going to be based on what's important to me. And I could totally choose the things that I've been socialized by. But there's some people who kind of never ultimately move beyond that. They just stay steeped in the socialization that they've grown up with. And that's fine, but it just means you won't kind of get to a certain level of your power and being human, essentially. You know. Let me just quickly look at my notes. So, a few tiny extra little pieces. So, as we go through this process of authoring ourselves and starting to look at kind of what do I actually believe versus what I've been told, we start to think more clearly for ourselves. We start to become more independent thinkers, and we start to also become more differentiated. So if I'm going to live my values and not always agree with my social context, I'm now going to start disagreeing. I'm going to express differences of opinion, and going through the process of doing that is a really important part of self-authoring, and it can be really uncomfortable, right? Because if I'm used to just agreeing with what the group, and I start going, well, hang on, I don't know about that. I don't think that is a right thing, and that kind of has that some awkwardness, and so an important part also of owning our values is developing the authenticity to express ourselves with indifference, and often we're confronted by a values conflict, a values dilemma when we do that, because a lot of the time we have value around kind of harmony and fitting in and not hurting people, right? So I'm then, as I start to express myself authentically, I'm like, well, how do I do that in a way where I still want to honor this value of having harmony in my social interactions? And that's one of I think the core developmental values conflicts that we have to grapple with as we start to kind of go through this process of discovering and expressing our values. And this is what development is, kind of a lot of it. It's kind of the growing pains of being in these disorienting dilemmas where I got to kind of figure out, well, how do I work in this situation if I'm going to start shifting my behaviors based on this? And that this is where values start to become more principles, right? Where I start to develop more nuance about how I'm going to express this value. So I might have a value around being, having kind authenticity or something like that, where I'm integrating these two things, and I have a principle that I start to kind of figure out, well, if I share in a particular way myself authentically, another person might still feel cared for. And then this kind of speaks to the process of kind of starting to be, in a way, like a scientist of ourselves and our life, to figure out kind of what this principle is. What is this steering ideal, this value that I have? How does it work in nuanced contexts?
It reminds me of, speaking about differentiation and development, it reminds me of just a quick story of where, one of my highest values is learning. And that's very important to me, to continue to keep learning and to continue to be a student. And there's a humility for me that arises in that. And then being in environments or communities where I am the student, and there was I've been a part of a few, and one I think of in particular where it was, there was a very strong hierarchical system where, the leader knew what was right, and there was a very strong practice there of kind of looking at your shadow. And I remember that I valued that. I value seeing my shadow. I value wanting to know what my blind spots are. I value growth and the evolution of my physical life, and the kind of the embodiment of my essence, and so I liked I was a rigorous student in these environments. But then I noticed that the work that I was doing was having me evolve, surprisingly or not, and had me develop, and where I started to have a stronger sense of self. And through that stronger sense of self, I started to recognize when things were not actually correct for me, or I didn't agree, or it wasn't right for me to participate, or actually it was important for me to say no. and the dissonance that would occur in these environments, where these environments worked so long as I wasn't. I was still in my very socialized mind. I was still very much in wanting to fit in, and I still wanted to fit in. And so there was this dissonance within me too of, wow, I can really see how when I say, actually, no, I don't need to do that next course, I really feel good. I feel I've got what I need. And kind of the reflection would be, oh no, you're just not seeing what you need, like I can see you more than you can see you. And it was this interesting shift in gears for me of, I am still the student, and I still have humility, and I have a stronger sense of self than I had before. And I was struck with where I had developing values around being in my rightness, and being in my sense of truth. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that, being a part of organizations, education systems, communities. If there's a particular structure where somebody knows more and you are therefore learning from them, and you two are growing and becoming more embodied in whatever the discipline is that you're studying, where there's this shift where no longer it actually feels right to be a part of that system in the same way, unless there is room for you to be differentiated. If there is enough elegance in the leadership for there to be difference and disagreement, which is not that common. So there's in this differentiation and development of our own value system and getting clearer about who we are, we actually do grow ourselves up, and we outgrow things.
Yep, love that.
Yeah.
And that then kind of leads to the final thing that I really wanted to say in this kind of larger theme of, well, how do you know your values? So like the core thing we've really been saying here is just needing to go in this deep, honest self-inquiry with compassion, with gentleness, honoring the process of figuring out what's yours and what's not yours in terms of inherited judgments and introductions and expectations, of looking at where there's conflicts and how do I figure out how to kind of do both of these things at the same time. So the final thing that I want to add to kind of this list of things is this, in each kind of moment as you remember it, each new context, asking yourself, what's valuable to me right now? Like, how do I want to participate in this moment? So the other things in a way have to like help us see the big picture, of like, where do I want to steer my life and who do I want to be? But there's also this kind of micro version of, in this moment, what's valuable to me? What's of value? And just being in the practice of asking this question has us come more into the clarity of who we are in our experience, in our moment-to-moment experiencing, and how is this moment impacting me, and based on how it's impacting me, what would I like to do? Do I want to go have a bath because I'm feeling tired and that would feel nourishing to me? Do I want to kind of push myself a little bit to plan my day tomorrow, right? And get ready because I know that's going to have me have a better day tomorrow. Like, kind of having that sense of clarity of how I lead myself moment to moment based on what is valuable to me in this moment is a super empowering practice in my experience. And I think that's everything I wanted to say there.
Yeah. Great.
Cool.
Okay, so we're going to put a practice link in the comments. So if you were vibing with what we've been talking about, or you want to do some self-exploration to kind of bring it into a more personal experiment for you, or exploration, check the comments in the next half an hour and there'll be a link there. All right, guys.
Great.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is day 7. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about emotions and values, and some other really juicy stuff. Thanks for coming and watching us. Bye.
See you guys.